With a broken violin and an unbreakable spirit, a simple woman played a note that silenced the critics and changed her life forever. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Grand Lincoln Concert Hall stood majestic and imposing, its velvet curtains and crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the empty rows of seats. It was audition day for the prestigious National Symphony Orchestra, and only the most accomplished musicians would be considered. 5 renowned judges sat behind a long mahogany table, their expressions stern and unreadable. They had been sitting through performances all day, and their patience was wearing thin. "Next," called out Marcus Blackwell, the lead judge, his voice echoing throughout the hall. He was a famous conductor known for his exacting standards and merciless critiques. The large wooden doors at the back of the hall opened slowly. A woman entered, looking completely out of place among the polished surroundings. Sarah Miller was 42, dressed in a simple blouse and skirt that had seen better days. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched an old violin case. Unlike the other candidates with their designer clothes and confident strides, Sarah walked hesitantly, her eyes downcast. "Your name and credentials?" Blackwell asked without looking up from his notes. "Sarah Miller," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I don't have formal credentials. I taught myself to play." Whispers spread among the judges. One of them, a woman with silver-streaked hair, rolled her eyes. "We don't have time for amateurs. This is a professional orchestra." Sarah nodded, seeming to shrink further into herself. "I understand. I can leave—" "No," interrupted Blackwell, looking up with sudden interest. "You've come this far. Let's hear what you can do." Sarah nodded gratefully and opened her case. The judges gasped collectively. The violin inside was clearly damaged, its neck was cracked, and one of the strings was missing. It looked as though it had been hastily repaired multiple times. "Is this some kind of joke?" asked one of the male judges, removing his glasses in disbelief. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice gaining a hint of determination. "It's all I have. My father's violin. It was damaged in the fire that took our home last month." Blackwell leaned forward, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Well then, Ms. Miller, let's see what you can do with a broken instrument. Play something challenging. Bach's Chaconne, perhaps?" The silver-haired woman protested. "Marcus, that's unnecessarily cruel. She clearly isn't prepared for—" "No, it's all right," Sarah interrupted, straightening her shoulders. "I know the piece." She lifted the damaged violin to her shoulder with surprising grace. The judges exchanged skeptical glances as she positioned her bow. The missing string would make the piece nearly impossible to perform correctly. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The concert hall fell into absolute silence. 5 pairs of critical eyes watched her every move, waiting for the inevitable failure. When she drew her bow across the strings for the first time, a single note emerged, pure, perfect, and hauntingly beautiful. It hung in the air like a ray of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The judges froze. Blackwell's pen hovered motionless above his notepad. The silver-haired woman's hand flew to her heart. Sarah continued playing, her eyes still closed. With masterful technique, she adapted Bach's complex composition to work around the missing string, weaving the melody into something both faithful to the original piece and entirely new. The broken violin sang in her hands, its imperfections somehow making the music more poignant, more human. As she played, Sarah's entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the timid woman who had entered minutes before. In her place stood an artist, completely absorbed in her craft, her body swaying gently with the rhythm, her face expressing every emotion carried by the notes. A tear slid down the silver-haired judge's cheek. Blackwell sat utterly still, his expression unreadable but his eyes never leaving Sarah's hands. Throughout the hall, staff members who had been carrying about their duties stopped to listen. The cleaning crew stood transfixed by the exit doors. A young stagehand wiped away tears. Not a single person moved. Not a single breath disturbed the spell that Sarah's music had cast over them all. When the final note faded into silence, no one spoke for several long seconds. Sarah lowered her violin and opened her eyes, looking uncertain again. Blackwell cleared his throat. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Sarah's fingers caressed the damaged wood of her violin. "My father was a luthier, a violin maker. He taught me to play when I was a child. We didn't have money for formal lessons, but he gave me his knowledge, his love for music." "And the violin?" asked the silver-haired woman. "Why haven't you replaced it?" Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It's the last thing I have of him. He made it himself. When our house burned down, I ran back inside to save it. That's how it got damaged." "You risked your life for a violin?" Blackwell asked incredulously. Sarah nodded. "Not just a violin, his legacy, his voice." She ran her fingers along the crack in the neck. "He always said the best instruments have a story to tell. Now this one has an even longer story." The youngest judge leaned forward. "Ms. Miller, your playing, it's extraordinary. How have you remained unknown?" Sarah smiled slightly. "I've never played professionally. I work as a night janitor at the elementary school. I play for the children sometimes during lunch breaks. They don't mind the missing string." The silver-haired judge was writing furiously on her notepad. "The way you adapted the piece to accommodate the missing string, it wasn't just a workaround. It was a reinterpretation. Brilliant." Blackwell stood up suddenly. "Ms. Miller, would you step outside for a moment while we deliberate?" Sarah nodded, carefully placing her violin back in its case. As she walked toward the exit, she could hear the judges whispering urgently among themselves. 20 minutes later, Sarah was called back into the hall. The judges' table had been rearranged, with Blackwell now seated directly in the center. "Ms. Miller," he began, "we've been conducting auditions for over 30 years. We've heard some of the finest classical musicians in the world perform on this stage." Sarah braced herself for rejection, clutching her violin case tighter. "But," Blackwell continued, "I cannot recall ever being so moved by a performance as I was by yours today." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "Your technique is unorthodox, clearly self-taught, and yet somehow perfect in its imperfection. You don't just play the notes, you understand them. You speak through them." The silver-haired woman stood up. "We would like to offer you a position with the orchestra, Ms. Miller," Sarah gasped. "But my violin will be restored by the finest luthier in the country," Blackwell said firmly, "at our expense, though I must admit I'm reluctant to change anything about an instrument that can produce such music." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. "Why would you want me? I don't have the training, the background." "Because," said the youngest judge, "technical skill can be taught. What you have, that connection to the music, that ability to move an audience, that cannot be taught. That's a gift. And," added Blackwell, "we believe it's a gift that should be shared with the world." 6 months later, the Lincoln Concert Hall was filled to capacity. Every seat was taken, and people stood in the aisles, all eager to witness the debut of the orchestra's newest and most talked-about member. Behind the curtain, Sarah stood in a simple black dress, her restored violin gleaming in her hands. The master luthier had worked miracles, repairing the crack and replacing the missing string. But he had left one small imperfection at Sarah's insistence, a thin line of gold running along the repaired crack, a reminder of the instrument's journey. "Nervous?" asked Diana, the silver-haired judge who had become Sarah's mentor. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "All these people." "They're here for you," Diana said kindly. "Your story has touched so many. The janitor with the broken violin who silenced a room of critics. "It wasn't me," Sarah said, running her fingers along the golden line. "It was the music." "It was both," Diana corrected her. "Now go show them what you showed us that day." As Sarah took her position on stage, the spotlight illuminating her simple figure, she saw Blackwell at the conductor's podium. He gave her a small nod, respect evident in his eyes. When she lifted her bow and played the first note of Tchaikovsky's Violin concerto, the audience fell into a collective hush. The note hung in the air, perfect and pure, just like that first audition day. But this time, it wasn't just 5 judges who sat in stunned silence. It was 2,000 people, all breathing as one, all connected through the music flowing from a once-broken violin in the hands of a woman who had found her voice. As the orchestra joined in, supporting her soaring melody, Sarah closed her eyes and played not just with her hands but with her heart, for her father, for the children at the school who had been her first audience, and for herself. The broken violin sang, telling its story to everyone who would listen. And they all listened. Every single one. Years later, when Sarah Miller became one of the most celebrated violinists of her generation, she was asked in an interview why she still performed on the same violin, despite having been offered countless valuable instruments. "Because," she said, smiling at the golden line that still ran along its neck, "perfection isn't about flawlessness. It's about finding beauty in what's broken and making it sing anyway." And when she played, audiences still fell silent at her first note, just as they had on that fateful audition day when a simple woman with a broken violin had changed everything.